Hi everyone, Paul here from FamilyWheels.ca with another car review for your growing family. And I want to look way back here for a minute to 2008. It was the year that Barack Obama was elected president. The Dark Knight was the best-selling summer blockbuster that season. A lot has changed since then, but one thing that really hasn't changed that much is the Audi Q5. It was released for the first time ever in 2008 as a 2009 model year vehicle. We had a refresh in 2013, but a second generation of this car has been slow to come. Well, here we have it in 2018. It's a little bit bigger than it was before. The styling is fairly similar. Audi didn't want to alienate those previous Q5 buyers because it has built up a very loyal ownership group. And Glenmore Audi here in Calgary, the dealership that lent us this car this week, say that 40% of all of their vehicles sold this past year were Q5. So they really want to try and hold on to those buyers. But one big change for 2018 is the fact that for the first time ever, Audi is making the Q5 in Mexico. All Q5s, no matter where you buy them, anywhere in the world, even in Germany, are going to be Mexican made. Now the Q5 has been a perennial favorite of ours here on the channel for years now. Let's hop on board this latest version and see how it stacks up this week here on Family Wheels. Now, if you're a real stickler for details, you might be thinking to yourself right now, what's Paul talking about? That's not a Mexican-made car. Its VIN number starts with a W, and that's right. Normally, a W designation means that a car is made in Germany. But in the case of the new Q5, just enough of its componentry is made in Germany and then shipped to Mexico for it to still get that W designation. But ultimately, no matter what country it comes from, the Q5 and its new 2018 version doesn't seem to have suffered with its move over to Mexico. And one real improvement there is its standard features as well as the options that you can throw into this thing. It's feeling much more contemporary, much more in line with other luxury compact SUVs. Up here in Canada, we follow the same trim levels as you'd see in Europe. So the base comfort trim, then this middle range progressive trim that I'm in here this week, and then the top of the line Technique. Whereas in the States, we see the Premium, Premium Plus, and Prestige packages. But they do tend to line up fairly similarly to one another. But standard equipment has gotten far more competitive. We now have a 7-inch infotainment system. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay come standard. So does push-button start, 3-zone climate control, heated front seats, heated side mirrors, and a power tailgate too. And build quality still remains excellent. Audi has a fairly similar look in all of its interiors now. And here in the Q5, it reminds me a lot of the A4 or the all-road wagon that I was driving around a few months ago. It's pared down and clean. It's sleek. All the buttons and switchware feel good under your hand, and they're right where you'd expect them to be. It's very intuitive. The infotainment system has also been far improved for 2018. And while I do generally prefer a touchscreen infotainment system, particularly for using Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, this dial system that we have here in the Q5 is actually pretty good. It's one of the better ones that I've come across. Audi seems to be figuring it out. Its voice recognition software has also gotten far better for 2018. And that to me means that this scratch pad, this sketch pad here that's also part of the infotainment system is a little bit redundant. I also saw it in the Q7 when I was testing it last year, and the idea is you can, enter in a phone number or an address or a radio station with your finger, but I've actually had a hard time getting it to work properly, and to me it kind of seems gimmicky and a little unnecessary. But one thing that's new for 2018 that I'm really pleased about in the Q5 is that we now have available to us the 12-inch virtual cockpit system in the top-of-the-line Technique package. It is so good. It's right in front of the driver. It replaces the analog instrument cluster like I have here in our test vehicle, and it's entirely digital. It means that you can customize it just the way that you want it. That whole page can also become your navigation screen if you wanted to. It looks really good. Now, despite the fact that equipment has improved in the Q5 for 2018, there were a couple of omissions that I noticed right away when I started scrolling through the options. First up, on that base trim, you don't get a rear backup camera, and that's becoming far more commonplace. You have to bump up into this progressive trim in order to get that, or pay extra on top of the comfort package to get a rear backup camera. Another thing that I noticed is that ventilated seats, even in the top of the line Technique package, don't come as part of the trim. You have to pay extra for that. Now, you know, if you watch the channel a lot, that I'm not crazy about ventilated seats. They are really tough to keep clean with families in the car because all those little perforations fill up with stuff. So depending on who you are, you might actually think it a good thing that you don't get ventilated seats just automatically as part of those upper tiered packages. But if you do want them, it's going to cost you an extra $1,650. And that is one of the things to keep in mind with the Q5, is that there are a lot of little extras you can throw on that you might actually think should come standard on the top of the line trim. Things like ventilated seats, things like the advanced driver assistance package, which costs $2,100 and is giving you adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, forward collision mitigation braking, traffic congestion assist, that kind of thing. Again, that's $2,100. If you want the S-Line Sport package, that's $2,300. If you want air ride suspension, that's going to be $2,400. So the additions, those little extras, will start to add up fairly quickly if you want a really tricked out Q5. But we talk about that air ride suspension here in this vehicle, and I'm not entirely sure if you need it because the ride is really good in the Q5. And I've commented about this before in previous tests that I've done in the previous generation of this car, and it remains the same here. It's nice for cornering. It doesn't feel like you're floating, but it also doesn't feel really harsh when you do hit those potholes or little bumps in the road. And the general noise here in the cabin remains really excellent too, at 62 decibels at 100 kilometers an hour. That's a fair bit quieter than we see in most SUVs in this category. And then finally, here for 2018 in the Q5, we now have this Drive Select function now standard on all trims. It allows you to scroll through different modes so the car has a slightly different feel. So in comfort mode, the engine isn't going to feel quite so responsive. The steering feel is going to be a little bit lighter. In fact, for me, it's a bit too light. I don't like the way this car feels when it's in comfort mode, strictly because of the steering feel. So I've actually changed that in the settings just so I get a slightly heavier steering feel out of the Q5 when I am just cruising. But then you can also bump into off-road mode if you're really, you know, going out into the mountains, or you can put it in dynamic mode so that the car becomes a little bit more sporty. Because it really is a fun car to drive, which is all the more amazing because for 2018, you only have one engine available to you in the Q5, and it's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. It just doesn't feel like a small 4-cylinder. It's gutsy, it's fun. And if we look at this compared to the previous generation of their 2-liter, it has 32 more horsepower and 21 more foot-pounds of torque, so it's got lots of oomph. A big reason for that is that Audi's also put in their 7-speed dual-clutch transmission. So in the previous generation of the Q5, we had an 8-speed, and you'd have to go over to that SQ5, the sportier version of this car, in order to get that dual-clutch transmission. Well, they've done the old switcheroo on us here, and now the SQ5 for 2018, which does have a V6 if you want more power, has the 8-speed auto, while this has the dual clutch. And it's smooth, it's lighter than the 8-speed, it's more fuel efficient, but it's also really fun to drive. Now, despite that increase in power, fuel economy is actually improved in the urban environment for 2018. Previous generations of the Q5's 2-cylinder put out 12 liters per 100 kilometers in the city, and now Audi's saying you should see 10 liters per 100 kilometers. The downside to this 7-speed dual-clutch transmission is that on the highway, you don't have that extra gear to give you a bit more lower revs when you're at high speeds. So we're actually seeing a downgrade in fuel economy in the 2018 Q5 versus the previous generation. Audi saying that the previous Q5 could hit 8 liters per 100 kilometers, and now they're suggesting you should see 9 liters per 100 kilometers. But I'm actually seeing better numbers than that myself. This week, on a mix of highways and city roads, I'm averaging a pretty remarkable 8.6 liters per 100 kilometers, which I am more than pleased with, and that makes it very competitive in this segment. All right, so I found a bit of a bumpy, gravelly back road here to talk with you about something that Audi purists are a little bit concerned about, and that's that the A4 sedan, the all-road wagon, now the Q5, are all walking away from Audi's famous Quattro full-time all-wheel drive system and instead going with what's called Quattro Ultra. And essentially what this system allows you to do is, under ideal driving conditions, you have a front-wheel drive car, and that's going to help a lot with fuel economy. But what makes this system clever is that it's actually able to look into the future and predict, based on the driver's inputs, the outside temperature at the time, what's going to be up ahead of you on the road, and change its all-wheel drive system accordingly. So you wind up having a more fuel-efficient vehicle that's still able to predict and give you a pretty solid all-wheel drive system. Now, I wasn't too sure about how good this system would be, so when I was in that all-road last winter, I really did try and put it through its paces. I found some pretty serious snow banks, some deep drifted snow, to see how it would perform in those environments. And as someone who's driven a lot of Audis over the years with that traditional Quattro all-wheel drive system that, you know, we're saying goodbye to here in the Q5, I was actually really impressed with how well Quattro Ultra performed in those really nasty environments. Here on gravel roads as well, I've tried to have the car wash out on me. I've tried to fishtail it a couple of times, and it's there for you. It grabs you when you really need it. But if you still have your doubts and you are getting yourself into some deep snow or ice or maybe some mud, and you want to be able to have the confidence of full-time all-wheel drive, all you have to do is scroll up to off-road mode here with the drive select function, and you've got permanent full-time all-wheel drive. So it's still there if you want it. Well, one thing that really impressed me about the previous generation of the Q5 was just how spacious the second row was, even though it doesn't look like that big of an SUV from the outside. The second generation has gotten a little bit longer, just a little bit, for 2018, and that means that I've got even more room here for this model year. I've got the headroom that I need at 6'2", and my legroom, even though I've adjusted the driver's seat for a tall person, I've still got legroom to spare. Now here in the second row, the seats are pretty comfortable. Since we don't have those ventilated seats that I was talking about, it means that we don't have those perforations to deal with when you're dealing with kids back here. 3 zones of climate control now come standard. Unfortunately, like in that S4 last week, we do have a pretty big hump here in the middle position, so it's not going to seat a 5th person very comfortably. But when it comes to car seats, man, the Q5 punches way above its weight class. Flip the car seat around into rear-facing mode, and I'm measuring out 28 inches from the back of the front seat cushion up to the glove box. That's up in the Toyota Highlander kind of territory, and very impressive for a car of this size. Now, before we get to our trunk test, here's something that shorter drivers really complained about in the previous generation of the Q5, and that was its mirror size. They said that they were so big that they couldn't actually see around them. It created a big blind spot. Taller drivers didn't have that issue. But Audi heard that concern. They made them smaller, a bit more streamlined for 2018, so that shouldn't be a concern anymore. Now, speaking of different heights of people, something else that's standard now for 2018 is this auto lift tailgate. Now, one nice thing about this is that it's height adjustable. So if you're a taller person like me and you do need it to really go quite high, you've got that option, and it does give you lots of clearance, so you're not always having to duck down to get into the trunk. Now, once you do look into this trunk, we've got 10 liters more trunk capacity for 2018. We've got 550 liters, which is still fairly small when you compare this to a lot of other SUVs out there. The Subaru Forester, for example, has 970 liters, but it is competitive amongst its class. When you look at this compared to the likes of the Jaguar F-Pace or the Mercedes GLC. 550 liters means that our standardized trunk test of a diaper bag, a stroller, a backpack, a couple bags of groceries, and a soccer ball can all fit in here, but you're not going to fit that much more. Now, if you do want to increase your capacity in this, you can slide those second row seats forward and give yourself 60 more liters, but the downside to that is that if, say, you want to, make some room for your family dog, you wind up having this hole in between the back of the second row and your actual trunk itself, where your dog's leg could go down, and if you braked suddenly, then it might do the dog some damage. So that's something to keep in mind if you do decide to roll those seats forward. Another way to give you a bit more space is to pull this lever right here, and that second row pops down. But you can see that it's not an entirely flat load floor, and that means that if you do have longer items, like say a TV that you're picking up from the store, it's just not going to slide in there quite as easily as we see in some of the other competitors. So, is this new Mexican-made Q5 better than ever? Yeah. I think it is, and I was prepared to have my doubts with this car because I really liked the previous generation, and I thought that especially in the first year, there might be some quality control issues as they get their new plant up and running. In every possible way, this new Q5 is better and a real natural progression for this vehicle as well. Unlike a lot of other cars, when they do go back to the drawing board, they make them way bigger, whereas this car already had a really nice size and they've just made it that little bit bigger, and I really like that for a family of our size. And I think that means that longtime Q5 owners are still going to feel at home in this thing. It's not going to feel foreign to them, but it also feels much more contemporary and much more relevant in what is a very competitive compact luxury SUV segment. So yeah, es muy bien. But it's your turn now, amigos. Let me know what you think of this latest Q5, what you think they missed out on in terms of design, what you really like. Leave a comment below, and then please subscribe while you're at it, and we'll see you next time, about a week from now, in the next review.